We often get caught up in the dramatic finales of dictators, right? Those big explosive downfalls.
Yeah, definitely. The ends are always spectacular.
But have you ever stopped to think about the very beginning? Like, not how their story ends, but how it actually starts.
That's a really insightful way to frame it.
Because maybe understanding that origin point, well, that's the real key.
I think so.
Yeah.
And the source material we're exploring today, this detailed analysis in Metin-Yapashilda, it kind of suggests that same thing, that all the focus on the collapse might actually distract us.
Distract us from what?
From seeing the more subtle roots of tyranny, how it begins. It argues that if you really want to understand these recurring figures in history, you've got to look at that initial spark.
Right, that moment of inception. And that's the journey we're taking today. We're doing a deep dive into Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus.
A mouthful of the name.
Yeah. Though history mostly knows him as Caligula, born in 12 AD. I mean, that name alone, Augustus Germanicus, it practically screams destined for greatness, doesn't it?
It really does. Named after Augustus himself, you'd think he was set.
Exactly. But his story took a very different, very dark turn.
And what's fascinating right from the get-go is how the analysis brings in this sort of Damocles metaphor.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, it's like, even with this auspicious birth, this analysis reminds us about the inherent instability of power.
Right.
That even the most glorious positions can be, precarious.
A constant threat hanging over you.
Pretty much. Which is something to keep in mind as we look at Caligula's early life, especially the context he was born into.
And that context, that feeling of things being on a knife's edge, it really sharpens when you look at Emperor Tiberius, Caligula's predecessor.
Oh, absolutely. Tiberius's reign was marked by serious internal turmoil. And the source we're using, it really emphasizes the impact of Sejanus's conspiracy.
Right, Sejanus, that whole plot.
The fallout from that was huge. You have to understand how deeply paranoid Tiberius became afterwards.
Led to a crackdown.
A brutal one. The treason law, the maestas, was expanded. It created this climate of fear everywhere. Even minor criticisms could be twisted into sedition.
Wow.
And this kind of environment, as the analysis points out, it fosters opportunism. Right? People making false accusations to get ahead. Respected senators ended up executed unjustly.
It paints a really grim picture, doesn't it?
It does. And you can see how that might shape a young person's view of authority and, trust. Or lack thereof.
And Tiberius himself, getting more and more paranoid, he eventually just retreats to the island of Capri.
Yeah, isolates himself completely from Rome, from the people.
So imagine young Caligula entering this world, the son of the super popular general Germanicus. But during this really uncertain, fearful time, the public must have pinned a lot of hope on him, seeing him as maybe a potential savior.
Totally. And the analysis highlights that initial joy, that optimism around his birth. People saw him as the heir to this beloved figure, Germanicus, someone who could bring back stability after Tiberius's increasingly weird rule.
They hoped he'd be like his dad, lead Rome into a new golden age.
Exactly. But as the source subtly hints, there were already these dark undercurrents beneath that initial hope. Things weren't quite right.
And those undercurrents, they really surge when Germanicus dies. Caligula was only 7.
Yeah, a huge blow.
The source presents this as a pivotal moment, almost the genesis of a darkness within him. Imagine losing your dad, a celebrated hero, under such politically charged, suspicious circumstances.
What does that do to a kid? That early trauma is just crucial to understanding him. Growing up surrounded by political intrigue, the constant danger his family faced, it must have had a profound impact.
Definitely.
The analysis then brings in the yin and yang concept from Eastern philosophy.
Oh, interesting. How does that fit?
Well, it offers this framework, right? Suggesting that even in a seemingly innocent kid, darkness can take root. It depends on the environment, the experiences. Nurture tipping the balance.
And Caligula's environment was becoming increasingly toxic. The source details the just horrific persecution of his mother, Agrippina, and his brothers.
All fueled by Tiberius's paranoia. And that detail about his brother, Drusus Caesar, starving to death in exile.
Chilling. Just utterly chilling.
And you can see how Caligula's isolation on Capri under Tiberius's constant watch just made it all worse. Surrounded
by the people who destroyed his family.
Exactly. Living under the intense scrutiny of this paranoid emperor. His upbringing was anything but normal. It undoubtedly shaped his worldview, his understanding of how power works. Ruthlessly, perhaps.
Yet when Tiberius finally dies and Caligula becomes emperor at just 25, It was like a breath of fresh air swept through Rome, wasn't it?
It seems that way initially. The source describes it almost like a Lala de Vries, a tulip era, a time of immediate welcome change.
He reversed unpopular policies, recalled the exiles.
Through massive games and feasts for the public.
It really looked like a new beginning, but you called it a false dawn earlier.
Precisely. His initial actions seemed to signal stability, and yeah, he got pretty popular for a bit. You can imagine the relief.
But the underlying darkness.
The product of that trauma we talked about. It was still there, just, dormant, waiting.
And then came what the analysis points to as the real turning point. A severe illness pretty early in his reign.
Yes. This is flagged as a critical moment of transformation. The source uses this stark image, like a caterpillar turning into a butterfly, but a dark one.
Whoa, that paints a picture.
There's a real sense that something fundamental, something sinister, shifted within him right then.
Is there debate about what that illness actually was?
Oh, absolutely. Big historical debate. Was it physical? Maybe some kind of brain damage, epilepsy perhaps? Or was it purely psychological? A breaking point where all that repressed fear and trauma just overwhelmed him?
We don't know for sure.
We don't. But regardless of the cause, the consequences were undeniable. His personality changed radically, terrifyingly.
And the period after that illness, it's just this slide into tyranny.
A terrifying one. The source details escalating paranoia, these arbitrary killings. Even his own family members, in-laws, advisors. Nobody was safe.
Imagine the atmosphere in the court. Constant fear, deep uncertainty.
And you have to understand the sheer unpredictability of his behavior. That was also deeply destabilizing.
How so?
Well, the source highlights these extreme mood swings. 1 minute he might be generous, the next. Sudden, inexplicable cruelty.
Oh, Blash.
Exactly. And this erratic nature, it just systematically eroded any sense of order or stability. The Roman Senate, the bureaucracy, nobody could anticipate what might trigger his wrath. Constant anxiety.
And then he starts claiming divinity for himself.
Yeah, that's a huge step. Equating himself with Jupiter, demanding worship. It was such a blatant, shocking disregard for Roman tradition.
People must have been appalled.
Deeply. The source specifically mentions him demanding to be addressed as God and how he twisted their own beliefs to serve his ego.
Was that totally unprecedented? Emperors were sometimes deified later, right?
After death, yes, that was common. But Caligula insisted on being worshipped as a living god. That was the radical departure. It offended traditional Roman piety, sure, but it also served to elevate him above any earthly authority, any constraint, reinforcing his absolute power in his own mind and in the eyes of anyone he could intimidate, which is pretty much everyone by that point.
And his treatment of the Senate is just outrageous to read about.
Tell me about it. Summoning them for trivial reasons, forcing them to applaud endlessly just because he walked in.
Making them wear slave clothes and dance. Seriously.
Apparently so. And of course, the infamous plan, maybe serious, maybe just an ultimate mockery, to appoint his horse, Sejanus, as consul.
It's almost darkly funny, but it shows such utter contempt.
Exactly. These acts of deliberate humiliation, they weren't just random cruelty. They reinforced his power, yes, but they also systematically undermined the Senate's authority and prestige.
The body that traditionally represented the aristocracy.
Right. By openly mocking them, he consolidated his own control and psychologically disempowered any potential opposition. Clever in a terrifying way.
All this extravagance, though, the crazy entertainment, the huge building projects, often pointless ones, it must have cost a fortune.
Oh, it did. Inevitably led to financial ruin for the state.
So how did he pay for it?
Crushing taxes, especially targeting the wealthy. The source points this out clearly.
Yeah.
Forced collection of goods, seizing inheritances. It got brutal.
Which led to food shortages.
Yeah, and fueled growing public discontent. You can imagine. The burden fell heavily on the populace. His methods were arbitrary, cruel, oppressive, widespread economic instability, deep resentment.
And yet, despite all this, no massive public uprising. How did he maintain control?
That's a key question the source addresses. He skillfully used public spectacle and fear. Twin tools.
Like the gladiatorial games.
Exactly. Those games, the very public humiliation of nobles. It was about creating visual and emotional shock to keep people in line.
Put people in a terrible position.
Right. Attend the games, appear loyal. Or stay away and risk being seen as disloyal, risk suspicion. A terrible dilemma.
It's a tactic you see again and again, isn't it? Using entertainment for control.
It's a classic authoritarian playbook move. Stage grand spectacles, distract people from grievances, project an image of strength while instilling fear through public degradation. potent combination.
The source uses this phrase, making dogs fight each other.
Yeah, a blunt analogy, but maybe effective. Caligula deliberately sowed distrust and division among the people.
To keep them from uniting against him.
Precisely. It might look like chaos, even madness, but underneath. A chillingly effective strategy to solidify his own grip on power. Weaken any potential unified opposition.
And if opposition did arise, or he even just thought it might.
Ruthless elimination, the source details it. Accusations, exile, execution. He systematically removed anyone he saw as a potential rival or threat.
And how could you defend yourself against that?
You couldn't. That's the point the analysis makes. When a ruler has absolute power and acts arbitrarily, due process, legal safeguards, they mean nothing.
Just meaningless.
The fear of false accusations, no effective way to appeal. It silenced dissent. Even the slightest hint of opposition was just too dangerous to risk.
Which leads to that rather sobering point in the analysis. Silent masses are the least problematic for a dictator.
It's a critical observation. Fear bred silence, and that silence, maybe inadvertently, allowed his tyranny to continue unchecked for a while.
That lack of public outcry doesn't mean support then.
Not at all. Often, like in Caligula's Rome, it's the direct result of fear and brutal suppression. This enforced silence creates a deceptive illusion of stability, of acceptance, very misleading.
The source then kind of touches on the cyclical nature of history.
Right, it gestures towards that, though wisely avoids drawing, simplistic modern parallels.
Just sets the stage, suggesting these patterns of power and corruption aren't unique, they repeat.
Exactly. And the implication is, by studying these patterns, we can gain insights into the dynamics of power and its potential for abuse across different times and places.
And then comes maybe the most bizarre episode of all, his war against the sea.
Ah, yes, the campaign in northern Gaul. It's truly baffling, ordering his legions to attack the water, throwing spears and arrows into the waves.
And collecting seashells as spoils of war, spoils of victory against Neptune, apparently.
It's almost unbelievable. And it's often cited as just clear evidence of his complete descent into irrationality, declaring war on nature itself. It vividly highlights how far his grip on reality had seemingly slipped.
A pretty clear sign things were off the rails.
To put it mildly.
And as we know, this relatively short reign of terror, it didn't last forever.
No, it came to a violent end. Caligula was assassinated by his own Praetorian Guard in 41 AD.
After just 4 years.
4 years of increasingly erratic and brutal rule. A violent end, as the source implies, to a profoundly violent period.
His own guards turned on him.
Which starkly underscores the instability at the heart of even the most absolute tyranny, doesn't it? Ultimately, that kind of power doesn't guarantee safety. Those closest to a dictator often become the instruments of their downfall when their own survival feels threatened.
So what are the big takeaways? The source concludes by really emphasizing the lessons we can still learn from Caligula, right?
Absolutely, especially about the dangers of concentrated power and, well, basic human fallibility. All humans err, it reminds us.
A crucial point.
It underscores why checks and balances are so essential in any healthy society, to prevent that kind of unchecked authority that let Caligula run wild.
And there's a sense of eventual consequence.
Yes, the analysis talks about this universal law of balance. Even the most powerful, corrupt figures aren't immune forever. Eventually, that destructive force is met by an opposing one, often from within their own circle.
Which brings us to the final, really thought-provoking point the source leaves us with.
It's quite a kicker.
Yeah. Considering this historical cycle of corruption, the lessons from Caligula, it asks us to ponder this radical idea. Could artificial intelligence govern nations in the future?
As a way to mitigate human fallibility, human corruption and power.
It's a startling proposition, isn't it? AI rulers.
It really challenges you to think about radical solutions to these persistent problems of governance, and to consider the profound implications, good and bad, of entrusting that kind of power to non-human entities. A fascinating concept to mull over.
Definitely gives you something to really chew on. Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
My pleasure.
Until our next exploration.